Thank you very much, Mr Atkinson, and can I join others who've congratulated the Honourable Member for Wantage, both on securing this debate and on the very measured way and very fair way in which he put his argument, and given the amount of anger that there is around, and we've all been exposed to it from our constituencies, that was quite an achievement. Mr Atkinson, the Honourable Member for Wantage, started off by saying that there's a lot of buck passing going on, and I absolutely agree with him that whoever you talk to blames somebody else. And in a sense, what we should be trying to do today is not simply point the finger, but work out where we go from here to sort the problem out. To give one example of the buck passing, I had a meeting with the regional manager of First Great Western in my area and the Cross Bristol franchise, which has been referred to by a number of honourable members. We all know there have been problems with maintenance, and we're told that the maintenance depot, as the Honourable Member for Bristol East said, at St Philip's Marsh, isn't ready yet, and that the stock they took over from the Wessex franchise that the Honourable Member for Romsey mentioned wasn't ready yet. Well, Arriva Trains Wales, I see in this week's Rail magazine, which I'm sure honourable members read regularly, were outraged by this. They said, "It's an outrageous suggestion and utter rubbish. I have had no complaints about the quality or the delivery of the fleet. We provided full availability every day in the weeks leading up to the 10th of December. So why did this rolling stock that Wessex and the Welsh services were able to run reliably right up to the 10th of December suddenly become so totally unreliable? It doesn't add up. Again, the buck passing is not achieving anything. The Honourable Member for Oxford East, quite properly, I think, said that both First and the Department for Transport need to learn lessons, and I think, speaking with the authority of a former Cabinet Minister, it's not just party political point scoring. The Department must take some responsibility here, because, yes, I fully accept, as the Member for Bristol South said, East, that there have been management failures, but the way the Department has handled the franchise is a source of concern. The Minister who's before us today wrote to me on the 16th of January about these issues, and he said, and I quote, "I am determined that appropriate action is taken to ensure that the performance of these train services improves." But I'm not quite sure what that action is or has been, and I hope that he will tell us not simply that he wants it to be better and it's not good enough, but the specific things his department is doing now to put things right. My honourable friend for Romsey referred to carriages being in warm storage, and this does seem to be a key issue about the capacity. And I think a point, Mr Atkinson, that hasn't been made so far is that if First provide a service of sorts with too few carriages, they don't fail on their cancellation target, and they don't necessarily fail on their punctuality target. In other words, provided that the train is there with at least one carriage, they don't trigger either of those penalties, which mean that they then have to give season ticket discounts or refunds. So financially, it's better for them to run these services short with all the chaos that we've heard.
Giving way. Would he also condemn the warm storage of actually our coaches down in Cornwall being taken away from us, passed up to Bristol and Bath to try and fix a problem there, and all my constituents and many in Cornwall being consigned to buses instead of having any carriages whatsoever?
I can well understand the anger of his constituents about that situation. I think that it was the member for Henley who talked about robbing Peter to pay for Paul, and clearly that is not a solution, though my constituents are very grateful for the loan. Mr Atkinson, we've heard about short formation, we've heard about the issue of the carriages, and I think the Honourable Member for Plymouth Devonport made a very good point, and indeed a very good contribution, about this whole issue of the franchise and the rolling stock companies and the profits that they are making. Because this was a structure that was set up by successive governments, and my sense about the rail industry at present is the rolling stock companies are rolling in it, for want of a better phrase. When, for example, First Great Western, again I've had a letter sent to me, First Great Western letter from the Customer Service Advisor in November said, quotes, "There are simply not the carriages available." Now, I just don't believe that. I suspect strongly that these carriages are available at a price. It may not be possible to get them, other than from Cornwall obviously, but it may not be possible to get them within the profit targets First Great Western have set themselves. But I think the Honourable Lady asked a good question. I think there may be an analogy here with it's a distant analogy, but with the 3G auction of spectrum. Huge amounts of money were raised, and everyone said how clever it was, and the government got lots of cash. And then subsequently it became apparent that actually probably too much had been paid for these things. And although the businesses thought they were getting a good deal, it turned out that they weren't, and there have been knock-on effects for the industry as a result. And I just wonder with this franchise whether actually too much was paid, whether First were capable of delivering the services that we need, whether it was specified to a high enough level. Because one of the things that I've met the regional manager of First Great Western for the Greater Bristol area and also the Honourable Ladies area, and he was saying that the specification was the most basic one possible by the SRA. And I think of all the Honourable Members who've spoken, our constituents deserve more than the most basic method possible, the most basic specification of timetable and frequency. The rhetoric about public transport, modal shift, getting people off the car, is used all the time, out of their car, but the reality is the government tries to get away with the minimum possible service, and it's simply not good enough. Mr Atkinson, we've heard of many horror stories, which I won't repeat, but just to cite one further one, indeed, from a constituent of my honourable friend, who describes a whole litany of problems, and then he says this, he said, passengers, luggage, and even a wheelchair-bound passenger were packed in so tight that the guard couldn't get on until some of the passengers got off. So they had to stay on the platform so the guard could get on, so the service could run. It is a complete farce. And the situation with people being packed on, and then we're told that that is actually safer than having just a few people floating around standing on, is a nonsense. And I think the Honourable Member for Newbury made the analogy with the fact that there are rules for overcrowding of cattle, but not of humans. It's a very telling point, and action certainly needs to be taken. My honourable friend for Bath, quite rightly I think, and I think all of us agreed when he said this, highlighted the fact that many of the people who work for First Great Western are as demoralised as our constituents are. And in fact, we don't want to take out our anger on the people who work there. I hear directly myself from many people who work for the company who, people love the railways. They go and work for the railways because they want to provide a superb service, and they are as frustrated as anybody with the rubbish that we've got at the moment. Now, my honourable friend highlighted really the four key areas. The inadequacies of the timetable, and we've heard particularly about the problems in the Peak area. We heard about it in Didcot, we heard about it in Romsey, and other constituents mentioned it. That is the key time where we can get traffic on the road. And just to give one parochial example, I have a major town in my own constituency of Yate, another major employer, Filton Abbey Wood of the Ministry of Defence, hundreds of people making that journey. There are rail stations at the start and at the end, and lots of people drive, because they can't rely on the trains. And that simply is madness. And this, in a way, I hope that the sort of summit meeting that the Honourable Member for Wantage talked about, that I'd certainly be very happy to take part in, brings this issue to a head. Almost, if all that we've gone through and our constituents have gone through in the last few weeks leads to action to get a grip on this situation, it may not all have been in vain, because action is urgently needed. In terms of policy towards the railways, I have a concern about the length of the franchise that's awarded. It may seem perverse in a debate talking about the failures of First Great Western to talk about longer franchises. I think many people would think 7 days was too long, let alone 7 years. But there is an issue about when franchises are awarded. Do the companies think they're in for the long haul? Do they have the incentive to buy the rolling stock, not to lease it? If we looked at a fundamental assumption of longer franchises, yes, with regular performance review, but with an assumption that a company that does a damn good job is in there for the long haul, many of us, I think, would see that that would give the industry the stability that we would all want to see. So a presumption, funnily enough, of longer franchises with some proper scrutiny. And I believe that the Liberal Democrats want to see serious action on the whole issue of train leasing, on the profits that the rolling stock companies are making, because it's almost like a domino effect. The cost of leasing is exorbitant, so the companies don't lease, so the service isn't good enough, and we are where we are today. So, Mr Atkinson, there is, if you like, call it blame, call it responsibility in many quarters, but the focus must now be on how we go on, how we tackle some of these problems, which are clearly happening across the network and really should have been foreseen both by the operating companies and by the government.